Hello everyone, let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about neurons, nerves, and the peripheral nervous system. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about the types of cells that make up this last type of tissue that we'll be talking about this semester, nervous tissue. So far, we've talked about epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and now nervous tissue. We'll be talking about the cells that are found in nervous tissue, as well as structures called nerves that are found in the nervous system. We'll be talking about the spinal cord and spinal nerves emerging from it. We'll talk about the brain and the cranial nerves. We'll compare the somatic and the autonomic branches of the nervous system. And within the autonomic branch, we'll talk about sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous system tissue. It's important to note that the nervous system, in conjunction with the endocrine system, the hormonal system of the body, those two systems together are responsible for coordinating all of the other body systems in order to maintain homeostasis. The nervous system has a lot of functions to perform every day. It has to receive sensory information from both inside and outside the body. It has to integrate all of that information. It has to then control the output, the response to that incoming information by controlling the effector cells. And it has to coordinate the actions of both the voluntary and involuntary sides of the nervous system. The organization of the nervous system can be described both structurally and functionally. The central nervous system is composed of the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is essentially everything outside of the central nervous system. When we describe the peripheral nervous system, there are pathways within it that are going to receive information from outside and inside the body and send that information to the central nervous system. These are sensory pathways, and we refer to them as being afferent. They are traveling toward the central nervous system. There are other parts of the peripheral nervous system that are efferent or motor. These are the pathways that are coming out of the central nervous system and back to the body. So afferent is sensory, and those are the pathways traveling toward the central nervous system. Efferent is motor, and those are the pathways traveling away from the central nervous system. You'll notice that when we discuss the efferent or motor pathways in the peripheral nervous system, we can describe more subdivisions. We can describe the somatic efferent motor pathways and the autonomic efferent or motor pathways. When you hear this word somatic, think voluntary. Somatic pathways are the kinds of motor pathways that are under voluntary or conscious control. So these are the kinds of neural pathways that innervate our skeletal muscles. In comparison, autonomic neural pathways are not under our conscious or voluntary control. These are involuntary neural pathways. These are the pathways that innervate glands, both endocrine and exocrine, as well as the other kinds of muscle, cardiac muscle and smooth muscle. Within the autonomic branch of the efferent or motor peripheral nervous system. We can also see two subdivisions, sympathetic and parasympathetic. So in this involuntary, autonomic side of our nervous system, these are the kinds of things that are going on outside of our conscious control. Some of them are occurring through sympathetic pathways and some through parasympathetic pathways. We're going to discuss those autonomic pathways in a separate lecture. If you go onto the internet or into textbooks, you can find lots of charts like the one you're looking at on this slide. And depending on the source material that you use, the way that the nervous system is outlined can vary. So if you look at this chart, they're depicting the nervous system at the top of the chart, and the first branches that they're making are into central and peripheral. And then the central nervous system is branched into the brain and the spinal cord. Now, the peripheral nervous system is broken down into somatic and autonomic. That's a little bit different from the way we just looked at it. It's perfectly fine to break it down this way. It's just a little different. Within the somatic side, the voluntary or aware side of this description, they're showing us both efferent and afferent pathways. Within the autonomic side, the involuntary or unaware side, you can find both afferent and efferent pathways. And then they're describing that within the efferent pathways, there are both sympathetic and parasympathetic branches. So again, you can divide the nervous system and depict the nervous system into several different flowcharts, but the information is the same regardless of what type of chart you construct or what type of chart you look at. The nervous system is very complex, it's highly branched, and those branches are interacting with each other. Remember when we talked about homeostasis earlier in the semester? We talked about what we called the stimulus response pathway. And when we talk about the nervous system, we're talking about the same kind of pathway in that information is coming to the central nervous system from the sensory or afferent pathways. The central nervous system is then integrating all of that information and sending out some type of response along efferent or motor pathways. The sense organs, your ears, your eyes, the touch and pressure and pain sensors that are in your skin and throughout your body, the sense organs and the sensory nerve endings that are out in the peripheral nervous system are receiving information all day long, every single day, from the outside world and also just from within the body. All of that sensory information is being fed to the central nervous system, and it gets there along afferent pathways, sensory afferent pathways. It's the central nervous system that does the processing, that does the integration of all of this incoming information to then elicit a response. Now, interestingly enough, sometimes the brain and the spinal cord are involved in this integration and response, and sometimes just the spinal cord is. The spinal cord can initiate a response without input from the brain under certain circumstances. And that's what we would call a reflex response. You know about reflexes when you go to visit a physician, and while that physician is examining you, she might tap your knee with a little rubber hammer, or she might put a light into your eye. The physician is looking for certain reflex responses that are initiated by the spinal cord with no higher input from the brain. Of course, the spinal cord can also communicate with the brain and does so quite a bit, so that the brain can have a say in how the information will be integrated and what the response will be. When you think about the brain integrating information, I want you to think about the brain acting as a storehouse of all of the experiences that you've had in your life. Because essentially what the brain does when it integrates incoming sensory information is it relates it to all of the past experiences that you've had in your life. And it then determines what the appropriate response is. Remember that responses that are sent out to the peripheral nervous system are sent through efferent pathways, motor pathways in the peripheral nervous system. And that's how the response will be carried out. Some of those efferent motor pathways are somatic pathways. We said the skeletal muscles are a good example of the kinds of effector tissues that will respond to whatever the brain is telling them to do. Things like cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and those glands, endocrine and exocrine glands, are different. They are going to reflect an effector response on the autonomic side of things, the involuntary side. Now, one of the terms that students sometimes confuse when we start talking about nervous tissue and the cells that are found in nervous tissue are these terms nerve and neuron or nerve cell. There's a difference between a nerve cell and a nerve. When we think about nerve cells, or the primary cells of the nervous system, we're talking about neurons. A nerve is something very different compared to a nerve cell or a neuron. The nerve cell, the neuron, can take different forms in the nervous system, but generally speaking, it has three components to it. It has what we call a cell body, it has dendrites, and it has an axon. You'll notice I have an asterisk next to the word axon, and that's because different neurons within the nervous system may have one axon, they may have more than one axon, they may not have any axons. So it does vary as you look at different regions of the nervous system. But generally speaking, a neuron has these three parts. The cell body, which is also called the soma, the cell body is the primary part of this cell. So this is where the nucleus would be located and all of the other organelles that we've talked about. Most of the cytoplasm is found in the cell body. All of the synthesis types of metabolic reactions that go on are happening in the cell body. This is the primary part of the cell. The other two parts, the dendrites and the axon, are actually extensions of the membrane that is around the cell body. So the membrane just reaches out, if you will, extends out and creates these other structures. So within the dendrite, there is cytoplasm. There just isn't much else. Within the axon, there is cytoplasm in there. There just isn't much else. So cell body or soma, dendrites, and axon. Now, when it comes to a nerve, that's a very different thing than a nerve cell or a neuron. Nerves are actually made out of bundles of axons. So if you took several different neurons and you brought them together, all of the axons combined would make up a nerve. Each of the axons in that bundle would be separated from the other axons with a layer of connective tissue called an endoneurium. Groups of axons within that bundle would be combined with each other into what we call fascicles, similar to the fascicles that we saw in muscles. And each fascicle is also surrounded by a connective tissue layer called the perineurium. And finally, the entire bundle, the entire nerve, all of the axons together, would be covered in a connective tissue layer called the epineurium. So when you think about a nerve running down your arm or running down your leg, what you're thinking of is a bundle of axons from many different neurons that are basically working together, functioning together. Now, the nerve only contains the axons of all of these nerve cells. So what about the rest? What about the cell body? The cell bodies actually also bundle together. They cluster together, and they form a structure called a ganglion. More than one is called a ganglia. So a ganglion is a clustered group of neuron cell bodies. And of course, they are associated with a nerve because the axons are attached to these neuron cell bodies. So when we think about nervous tissue in the peripheral nervous system, it's composed of nerves and ganglia. It's just that within the nerves, within the ganglia, we can describe individual cells, nerve cells or neurons. On this slide, up at the top, you're looking at a drawing of a human arm. You can see a region of the thoracic area right here. You can see some ribs here. And here's the arm. We have the upper arm here with the shoulder. Here's the elbow. Here's the forearm, the wrist, and the hand. The skin has been removed. You can see some of the musculature here. And then you can see this yellow structure, this line running down from the area of the shoulder all the way down. It branches out over the hand. There's a couple of branches here at the elbow. This is a nerve. Nerves are grossly visible in anatomical structures like an arm. At surgery, a surgeon can move muscle and tendon and ligament and see these nerves visibly there in the tissue. This is not an axon. This is a bundle of axons. And along its length in various locations are the nerve cell bodies that belong to those axons. Those are what we call the ganglia. So throughout the body, there are both ganglia and nerves. Now remember, if you were to take away the outer layer of connective tissue around a nerve, the epineurium, you would find a whole lot of individual axons. That's what they're showing us here. As a nerve runs along through other tissues, it tends to follow the same pathways that blood vessels take. So it's very common to find both an artery and a vein and a nerve in the same areas. Now over here, where it's marked B, you're looking at an image that was taken underneath an electron microscope. They cut through a nerve in a cross section or a transverse plane, and we're looking at the cut surface. You can see that there's a structure right here, there's another one right here, and right here. These are fascicles. So these are groupings of individual axons. The fascicles are surrounded by a layer of connective tissue called the perineurium. Each individual axon, remember, also is surrounded by a layer called the endoneurium. And then the entirety of the nerve is surrounded by a connective tissue layer called the epineurium. Now, when we look at an individual neuron, when you look at the cell body or the soma, it looks similar to a lot of the other cells we've looked at this semester. There is a nucleus and other organelles in the cell body. There's a cytoskeleton in there and cytoplasm. The membrane around a neuron gets a special name. It's referred to as neurolemma. It has some specializations associated with it, including the fact that it has lots of these extensions that we've mentioned. The dendrites are simply extensions of the membrane around the cell body. The axon is just one big long extension of the membrane coming out of the cell body. Now, a couple of important things to know about neurons and nerves are down at the bottom of this slide. Once the neurons develop in a human being and mature, they stop dividing for the rest of the person's life. So you cannot replace a neuron that is destroyed. You cannot recreate neurons by having other neurons divide and replace them. It just doesn't happen. The genes that would be required to make that happen are not turned on, they're not active once those neurons are in place. Now, neurons do live a good long time, so that's good, right? Because once they're in place, they're not going to divide and create new neurons. Now, when it comes to nerves in the peripheral nervous system, nerves can regenerate, but only under certain conditions. So if you have an injury to a part of the body and a nerve is damaged or even broken, transected, or cut, under certain circumstances, that nerve can grow back, it can regenerate. Now, that is not coming from cell division. That's not coming from the injured neurons dividing. Instead, the injured neurons are replacing their axon, the axon that was damaged or destroyed. Now, I said that this only happens under certain circumstances. And the important circumstance is this: the ganglia have to be intact in order for nerves to regenerate. So the cell bodies of the individual neurons have to be intact in order for the axons to be replaced. We'll talk more about nerve regeneration later.